Um, Becca, would you like to start?
Hi everyone, I'm Becca. I'm from about 40 minutes south of Boston. My pronouns are she, her. I'm 20 years old. My dad is trans, male to female. And I'm a college student. I'm studying criminology and political science.
Michaela?
Hi everyone, my name is Michaela Santisi. I go by she, her pronouns. I live in Philadelphia and I'm a collager because I have two moms.
Cool. My name is Angel. I use they, them pronouns. I'm 24 years old. I'm a collager because I have a lesbian mom and I live in New York City.
And hello again, my name is Jordan Budd. I use he and him pronouns. I'm a collager because I have a bisexual father and I live in Providence, Rhode Island. Did I say that I'm 32? I'm still grappling with it, so maybe I skipped that part. Anyway, let's dive in. We have a few questions that we are planned to talk about, and then we would love to use whatever extra time we have at the end to open it up to the audience to ask whatever you'd like. So first and foremost, let's get into family stories. Queerspawn, which is a word that a lot of us like to use to describe ourselves. It's very reclamatory, if that's the right word for that. Anyway, it's very important to us to talk about family formation and how our families were created. We have several different categories, so to speak, for family creation, including assisted reproduction, adoption, coming out later in life, etc. So those are really formational experiences for us and part of how we connect with one another. So we'll go in the same rotation. Becca, would you share a little bit more about your family and how it was created? And what was it like growing up with an LGBTQ parent?
Hi, this is Becca speaking. So my parents were high school sweethearts. My dad was not transitioned at the time, so she transitioned when I believe I was 12. So at that point, she was a little bit older than 40. So she went most of her life not identifying as the correct gender that she felt. So I didn't really grow up with an LGBT parent. It was more kind of thrown at me, if you will, when I was actually starting high school. So when I was becoming a woman, if you will, so was my dad. And I think sorry, what was the follow-up question?
Just what was that experience like? And I guess given the circumstances, what was it like for you to learn that information, and how did you process that information?
Sorry, there's a lot to my story. So starting from the beginning, my dad was an alcoholic. So I never had really a great relationship with her. We did activities together, like skiing, we really bonded over. And so when she was getting sober, part of getting sober, as most people know, is making amends. And so when she was making amends, she told me no more secrets, no more lies. But that was not at the point where she told me that she was planning to transition and how she really felt. So she got sober. She was sober for about 6 months before I knew. And it's funny because I didn't know. I knew before my mom knew, because when you're in 8th grade, 9th grade, you start, snooping on your parents' phone. So, so snooping on my dad's phone, I found the Facebook app, and I went on the Facebook app and I saw like a whole new Facebook, like a Facebook account. And I'm like, oh, Dad, like we should be friends on Facebook. And my dad's like, oh no, the app came with the phone. And me being, an 8th grader, freshman in high school, I'm like, I know so much better than that. And so I was so confused. I was like, why is my dad logged into a woman's account? It didn't even cross my mind that my dad was transitioning or anything. Like, it wasn't even a thought in my head. So then, further into looking, further into snooping on the camera roll, of course, I saw more pictures and they started to look more like my dad, because my dad was, dressed up, did the wig thing, just dressed up like as a woman as she felt comfortable. And in my head didn't even register that was her, until, I did more snooping and figured that out. So I kind of knew before my mom knew. So that was hard for me, trying to keep that secret. And I think I was really angry. I was so angry because when she was getting sober, it was no more secrets, no more lies. And this was just the biggest secret of my life. And yeah, it was really hard keeping that from my mom and my younger brother. So I should have mentioned that I have a younger brother. So I was so angry with her, and I think she kind of knew that I knew, because after she got sober, we had a much better relationship. She was much more caring and much more involved in my life, aside from the sports that we did together. So it was about, I think, 3 or 4 months after I found the Facebook account, she officially came out to me. And my mom knew. I'm a big dates person, so my mom knew of August of 2016, and I officially had the conversation with them in October of 2016. And at that point, no one knew besides me and my mom, and I was expected to keep the secret of my dad, from my younger brother, who I'm very close with, because we grew up in a household with one parent. Basically, my dad was there but not emotionally present. So I did a lot of the raising of my brother, and trying to keep that secret from him was a lot. So I think when my dad first transitioned, it was so hard for me to even be okay with it, because at the time I was very, and still am, into social justice, and I'm very accepting. But when it's your own family, it's a little hard to be like that. And it's hard to explain to other people, because you didn't have the community that collage is. I didn't know what collage was. And so I went to therapy, and through therapy, my therapist helped me through that. My pediatrician actually found collage through one of these kind of conferences, and I got connected to other people that kind of understood what I was going through. But I feel like my situation is very unique, in the way that there's the alcoholism, and then there's the secrets, and then there's and everyone's situations are unique. So it's really hard to find another person that's my age, that really gets it. So collage has really helped me through that. Thank you.
Michaela, I'll refresh you on the question. We'd love for you to share a little bit more about your family, how your family was created, and what it was like growing up with queer parents.
Yeah, hi, this is Michaela speaking. So actually, I was really grown up in a household with two moms. I was adopted, but before I was adopted, around 9 months, I kind of I was transitioning from foster care, and there's a whole process along with that. But as a baby, I kind of was brought into the house I am in today, and kind of raised, and as I grew up, I didn't even know that having two moms was different. You know what I mean? It wasn't I didn't even think it was different, or it was my normal, to say the least. It was my normal. And I have, so it's me, my two moms, and then I have a brother and a sister. And actually my sister is trans. She was a male and transitioned to a female. So me and my family always just joke around that we have the biggest rainbow in the in the neighborhood, you know what I mean? Like, but it was definitely difficult. There's some difficult times in my life growing up that with my family. Um, there was a point in time where, you know, growing up, I would always hear like, you know, things about my moms and, you know, how they're not my real parents. Like, where's your real parents? Because, you know, I'm adopted. And I would always have to explain, like, those are my real parents, you know, like, and it was always difficult, just the questions. And, you know, it was hard to tell if it was like a serious question or like a question that like was just to make me uncomfortable. And, you know, I was dealing with that. And then my sister transitioned and I was just kind of overwhelmed. I was like, what's happening? Because one, as I got older, I realized my family wasn't normal. And then two, my sister came out as a girl and I was really angry, had the same kind of emotions. Like I was very angry, confused mostly. Um, it was weird having like my family kind of change right before me when I was probably in middle school. Um, and you know, I remember being in class and then have my friends come running to me and be like, your brother's in the girls' bathroom, and like having like weird things like that happen to me. Um, but I think all of that made me stronger as a person, made me more of an activist and things, because at the end of the day, this is my family. You know, I have a unique story. Um, I was lucky enough to be so young. I got adopted at 2, but I've always been with them since 9 months. So I grew up with them. Like they are my home, and it's really um, big for me to educate people on LGBTQ families and, you know, just being a collager, because I feel like, you know, we know it's LGBTQ community, but we're kind of like less focused on like the kids involved, in my opinion. So that's why collage is so great. I've been a part of collage for a while now. My parents thought it was a great idea just to really give me a lot of resources and things to look up about LGBTQ families as I was going through tough times. And as I read it, I was like, wow, like I'm not the only one here. My age, people are going through the same thing as I am. So I felt less alone. And go to Family Week in Provincetown, Massachusetts at the end of the July, early August is a great way for me to see people my age again in real life, um, going through the same things, sharing stories, seeing similarities and differences. It's great. And so I now have a really strong relationship with my family. We are all super, super close. I think the hard times really brought us all together, made us understand each other more, um, which I am really, really lucky about. And I'm really lucky to have such a supportive family backing me up through things. And also, you know, having a younger sister, like it's it's annoying sharing clothes and stuff, but she is my best friend, my best friend. And, you know, sharing tips about boys and just like fun little things here and there just make me overjoyed with being such a big sister to her. And so I truly love my family and I'm so blessed that I have them in my life. So yeah.
Thank you, Michaela. Angel, same question.
Yeah. So my mom and dad were married and they had me and my brother. My brother is 2 years older than me. And when I was about 3, my mom came out as a lesbian, and the timeline's really blurry because I was so young. And I asked my parents, like, exactly what year did this happen? They're like, I don't know. So like that's a little bothersome because I like to like archive my life. But I think I was around 3 or 4. My mom came out and she dated a woman for about 6 months, and they were kind of in a like trial phase, kind of where my mom was really trying to figure out what her identity was, with two small kids in her life. And they ended up trying to get back together actually and trying to work it out, and trying to see what other relationship structures they could have that would allow my mom to be herself but have our family still be a unit. And I think they tried that for like 6 months to a year, and that didn't end up working. So then they ended up getting a divorce. And I grew up in a really rural and conservative part of Connecticut, actually. And we were like the only queer family that we knew for miles and miles and miles. um, my mom had some other lesbian friends, part of her community, that knew about collage. And so she enrolled me and my brother in collage programming when I was probably 7 and he was 9, somewhere around that. And, at school, I would have to make up stories about who my mom's partner was. So once my parents did actually get divorced, my mom started dating this woman for 9 years. So she was kind of like a step parent to me. And yeah, she actually was like a pastry chef. And so she would cook these like, or bake these like intricate pastries and desserts and put them in our lunch boxes. And then I have so many memories of like sitting at the cafeteria table and taking out this like pinwheel pastry and my friends being like, where did you get that? There's no bakeries around here. Like, where did you get that? And I would just like freeze and be like, um my mom's friend is a pastry chef, and just make up little lies here and there just because it wasn't safe at that time, and in the part of the world where I lived, to be really honest about what my family looked like. um I have memories of some people, friends I had, asking them to come over. And once their parents found out that my mom was a lesbian and lived with another woman, they wouldn't allow their child to come into our house, um, because they were like evangelical Christians and they really believed that it was contagious and they didn't want their daughter to be around that. So those were definitely the hard parts. And being part of collage and going to family week, was like the first time in my life that I felt like I could be myself, like fully. Like there was nothing I had to lie about anymore at all. I could embrace talking about my family honestly, which meant I could also embrace all of the stories that we had together, the good ones and the bad ones. There were times where I couldn't, my mom's partner was not great to me, treated me not great. And we had a really tumultuous relationship, but I couldn't talk about that at school to my friends because then they would just blame it on them being lesbians. There was no way to like actually have a safe and supportive conversation about that, until I went to collage and then found other kids who had similar experiences, maybe also had like their parents came out and they got a divorce and now their parents are dating other people and what that's like as a middle schooler, elementary schooler. So yeah, and my brother also did all the programming with me. So that was like really good to have him as a support, and we would switch houses together. But I think like it was a unique situation for me as well. As Becca said, every person's story is really unique, even though we do share the similarity. And one of the unique parts about it for me was that we could pass as a heteronormative family when we had to. My parents are still really good friends, my mom and my dad, and we're actually on family vacation together all right now, and my mom and dad are with us. So when we're traveling together, we look like a straight family. And I have a dad in my life who's my dad, and I can talk about him and talk about my mom and my dad. And that is a privilege I have for sure. But it also feels like sometimes being part of this queer family is erased when I don't want it to be. And I think as an adult, when I've come into this identity more and really taken a lot of pride in it, I have to explain that part. Like, yeah, I have a mom and a dad, but I also have a queer family and I grew up in a queer family. And yeah, it was quite a journey, I think. But as Michaela said, it also made me stronger and made me who I am today. And I like really can't imagine what my life would be like and who I would be if my mom wasn't a lesbian and I didn't have this community around me.
Thank you for sharing, Angel. This is Jordan speaking again. We're going to move on to our next question, and folks can feel free to answer in whatever order. This time, just to shake things up a little bit. So, Angel, you mentioned identifying as queerspawn or as a collager. And I think that that is one thing that folks who are not familiar with LGBTQ families or collage might not understand really is the degree to which we feel that having an LGBTQ parent is an identity in and of itself. Could you all explain how you identify, whether you use queerspawn or collager, what those terms mean to you? And most importantly, how did this experience, how did this identity impact how you've shown up in work as an artist or in political work or social activism? How does this impact those areas of your life?
Hi, this is Becca speaking. So I identify as a collager. I just feel like queer spawn fits me, but like doesn't fit me because my dad wasn't transitioned at the time when my parents were together, and they were married for almost 20 years at the point where my dad transitioned. But going back to what Angel and Michaela said about like being in school and like not feeling like you can talk about what your family situation is really like. I think that was probably the hardest part for me too, with hiding, because I also lived in a conservative-ish town. And I think, you know, my dad would show up to my softball games in a skirt and, you know, right from work, and my friends would be like, oh, like, who's that? And I'd be like, oh, well, my aunt. And I'd just be so afraid to even say really who my dad was, and even having anyone over the house, making friends, especially I went to a new high school. I didn't know anyone at my high school. So even making friends, I was afraid to bring anyone back to my house. I was afraid to hang out with people because getting rides, because then you have to explain. And I feel like for me, explaining is the hardest part because I love my family and I love the relationship that we have now. Like we're the closest we've ever been. And everyone in my family is really like truly my best friends. But, you know, at the beginning, it wasn't like that. So it was all like we were all very isolated from each other because we were all going through it at different points in time. So my mom was just dealing with it. And then when you I think of it as in stages. So when you kind of go through it, we went through anger and then grief because for us, we were like mourning my dad because my dad was no longer there, but it was it was a healthier relationship. So I identify as a collager because I feel like queer spawn doesn't really fit me. And collage has been great for me. I really connect with other people. And everyone's stories. So yeah, thank you.
You want to go, Michaela? Or do you want me to go? Okay. Yeah, I definitely identify, like, I use the word queer spawn more than I use collager, mostly because I feel like queer spawn is a shorter explanation. I'm just like, my parents queer and I'm their kid. Whereas like collage, I'm like, well, there's this organization and it's for people with LGBTQ parents. If I have more time, then I will explain that. And I think when I'm in a collage setting, I use collager a lot because we all know what that means. But queer spawn as a term wasn't even invented by collage. And it, as Jordan said earlier, it is a reclamation of an identity. And a lot of people don't like it. Like a lot of people, I mean, used to not like it and maybe have come around, but still some people don't like it. And some of these people are people who aren't queer spawn and don't really have a right to have an opinion on this word. But to me, it's like, I know the word queer has been reclaimed too. That used to be derogatory, and it's not anymore for the most part. Like, so many people identify as queer, including myself. And I think it's a really powerful word because it feels like, yeah, it feels like its own identity. And I think it really gets to the core at why this identity matters. A lot of people, as Michaela mentioned earlier, in LGBTQ community, focus on the people who are LGBTQ, and especially if they're parents, focus on the parents, which is important, but we get forgotten about a lot as the kids of LGBTQ people, and our experience gets erased a lot. Like, for example, with the Don't Say Gay law that was passed in Florida, like, people are talking about queer kids in school, which again is really important, but that means that kids that have queer parents can't talk about their family in school. And that's a huge erasure that's happening. And I think there's really unique parts about this identity, depending on what your story is, of course, and what your family structure looks like. But if you're someone who grew up with queer parents as a baby or from a really young age, you have to navigate this experience of deciding whether to come out or to not come out about your family at an extremely young age, younger than people have to think about their own sexuality and come out about that. And it's something that you don't really have. I mean, you have a choice whether to come out or not about your family, but that is the reality of the situation. People do start asking questions when you're really young. People ask invasive questions about how your parents have sex, and people with straight parents don't get those questions. So it's a really, really unique identity. And of course, not everyone who has LGBTQ parents feels part of this community or feels like they have this identity, but I'm lucky to have this identity. I think finding collage allowed me to have this identity. And I think there's a lot of power that comes in naming something and creating this label. And that's not to separate us from other people who have straight parents or to separate us from the queer community at large, but it's to find our place in that community. And it feels extremely empowering to me to be able to hold this identity for myself and then explain to people what it's like for me if they're curious.
Wow, that was really good. Hi, this is Michaela speaking. So I use the term collager. I feel like I've always used that term growing up. Queer spawn, not so much. I mean, here and there, but not really. I mean, where I live and like the school I go to, they know about like, you know, LGBTQ parents and stuff. But if I say queer spawn, I feel like that's where they're like, what is that? You know? And collager, like, I feel like I've learned how to explain it in like a short way. Because like Angel said, it's all about the organization and this and that. And so like, I kind of shortened it up. But growing up, I've always considered myself a collager when I had the knowledge too. They're having a family that is considered different, I think, you know, is hard, but also empowers you at the same time. And being young and having like growing up and like in middle school, elementary school and middle school is where it probably was like the hardest time for me, because elementary school was where like they're like, oh, like where's your dad, or do you have a dad? Because they always would see like my mom's, like there was no father figure in my life. And that's where it started, and then it progressed into like, you know, how they have sex, like Angel says, an example, or stuff like that, because it got the word like spread without my permission. And so it was really, really challenging to have someone else that was close to me share my story. And it forced me to like answer weird questions and just like things that I didn't want to explain, because it's very important. Like you have this family no matter what stage you're at, if it was in the beginning, the middle, or towards the end, like it doesn't matter. But it's about you sharing the story. That is the most important part, is you sharing it, no one else. And so I didn't really have that, but you know, I was either like, I could be sad about this, or I can turn this into my own and take that chance back for myself to explain. And that's what I did. And as people, like, I've learned to be kind of like stubborn with questions and stuff, kind of like putting them in their place if something's off, like not being scared to like push people off on certain things. Cause I feel like when in my case, like you kind of like you have to do that because you had your experience already shared, and people are trying to get all up in your space about your life, and you're just like, you like, no thank you. I don't need that right now. And um it's very important to set boundaries for yourself, and know that you don't have to share if you don't want to. Like there are some cases where people would come up to me and say things, and I was just like, I don't want to talk to you. Like there's time and space for things, and just like it's going to happen or it's not. And I feel like I became that way because of my parents, because of my two moms. They did end up splitting up. And so I, and like ended middle school, high school, beginning of high school for me. And so that was a little hard, but the same influence and power was still there. And so they told me like, you got, this is your life, your story. This is all you. It involves no one else. And if you trust someone, stuff like that, you tell them the whole story, but you don't have to if you don't want to. And I feel like that shaped me into who I am, and just like taking action in certain spots and places. At my school, I go to a good school overall. I mean, they were very supportive with my sister coming out, and like the principal of the school is great, and like the school like teacher community is great. The students are a little bit questionable here and there, but for the majority, I have a good community where like you find a good group of friends and you start like clubs like GSA, Gay Straight Alliance, stuff like that, which my stepbrother is in like the leader of. And just like taking roles and spreading awareness, I think is really important, especially in high school, because people are like, you don't know what people are going through. Everyone doesn't know what someone's going through, and they could have LGBTQ parents, or they could be trying to figure out their sexuality themselves, and having organizations and stuff like that is super helpful, not just for me having LGBTQ parents, but people who are also trying to navigate themselves. And so like that's like a small part of things that I do at school. There's other like political things. Like I am the only Black person in my family. I'm adopted, only Black person in my family. But I joined the NAACP Youth Council, and like trying to get involved with that, learning more about Black heritage, stuff that I can do on my own to help understand myself more. And it all started from like taking back my own story and having my parents to help guide me through that. It was very, very important for them to do that, and I'm super lucky.
Before we move on to the next question, I want to just remark on what is very frustrating about the current political climate, especially how the word groomer has been thrown around. As collagers, as queerspawn, we are who they are talking about when they make those comments. Like, we are literally the children that are being corrupted in this situation, corrupted obviously in huge air quotes. And I think that that is why the double whammy of also being erased in the conversation is exceedingly frustrating, because we are simultaneously the subject of all of this fake concern and yet we are not the folks that are asked how we feel about what is happening. Very few folks reach out in terms of interviews or what have you. And so opportunities like this to really sit down and talk and share what these experiences are mean a lot to us, because it's rare, and it's much rarer than it should be. But I'm so appreciative of all three of you strongly representing different views when it comes to growing up in these families and having these families. So on a related note, our next question is about current events. And again, please feel free to couch this in who you are as an artist or an activist, and how your LGBTQ family has impacted your perspective on these issues. But I'm just very curious, what are your reactions to all the recent Supreme Court decisions? Obviously, the big one is the overturning of Roe v. Wade. There are certainly implications for LGBTQ families moving forward, given the language of the opinion, even if the issue itself was abortion. And then beyond that, there were other decisions that are going to impact younger people more than almost everyone else, including decisions on the future of policing as well as climate change. Where are you at in your thinking about this? How does it relate back to your family? And what has the impact been on any conversations that you're having, either with your friends, with other collagers, with your family, etc.?
So I think the decision of Roe v. Wade is just the decision itself is obviously very infuriating for a lot of us. But I think the language of it is even more infuriating. I think the fact that Clarence Thomas mentioned Obergefell v. Hodges, it's very scary for most of us who have married parents, because my dad is identified as the state as a female now. So my parents are technically married female to female. So I'm not sure what that means for my family. I'm not sure what that means for any of us. And I think it's scary. I think now we haven't really, LGBTQ, I feel like, hasn't been at the front of the political conversation since 2016. That's for me, that's just kind of how I think. So now it's like, now we're at the front of the conversation again. And now all of the people who hate LGBTQ people are coming out of the woodwork, I think. And just with Facebook posts and just speaking their opinion. So I think it's scary now. We're really seeing people's true colors, and so yeah, it's scary. I think we live in a scary world right now, and I think most of us are nervous for what's to come in the next year or so. Thank you.
This is Michaela. I'll go next. So like, no words, honestly. Like, so disappointing and so furious. Like if you really think about it, like my parents in general, grandparents have fought for this already, right? Like we already fought for this, and now it's getting overturned again, and then we have to continue fighting. It's just unbelievable. And of course we will do so, but at the same time, it's like we keep on repeating cycles over and over again. Like lessons aren't being learned, and that's what's so frustrating, is that we have an opportunity to change the world and everyone preaches that, but yet we're not following through. And like, having gay moms, like, like with Roe v. Wade, like it's kind of like not a big deal. It's not their thing. It's not what they do. But at the same time, like that doesn't mean they're not going to fight their women. This is for women's rights. The fact that if I'm being honest here, like guns have more rights than women do now. And that's that's insane to me. And now, like, having this being overturned, it really pushes you to think, like, what's going to happen next? What other things are going to happen next? And, you know, social media, I mean, I'm on TikTok and stuff, whatever, but a lot of people, I'm seeing like the same kind of frustration that I'm feeling. I mean, they're not coming through like any LGBTQ type of situations, but just their anger in general. Um, and it's good to see the same emotions and stuff. But like, it's just out. It's crazy because at the end of the day, I don't think it's necessarily. I mean, it's definitely about abortion, but I think it's more just like taking over women, and just I feel like we've been fighting for this for so long, and yet we're still in the same place. And yeah, no words. I'm so furious about it. And then having this, getting kind of bring like the idea of gay marriage and stuff being brought back up to the surface because of this overturn decision is scary, because there are families. Like, I don't think enough people understand that like LGBTQ people are wanting to have kids, wanting to get married. Like, it's not like, you know, they're just there. You know what I mean? Like, they want to have a life the way they want to live it. And, you know, we've like my parents, they got married like illegally, to say, like, kind of, and then they had to get remarried once it was legal again. So they had like a round two type of situation. And they actually got married in Provincetown. But like the amount of families or people wanting to live their life, get married to the person that they love the most, and having that get ruined by something that could spark up is terrifying. And, you know, I'm really like praying for the people. I'm like, just the people who are hurting right now, the people who are struggling, the people who are in danger, or like having to make tough decisions right now for themselves and for their own bodies. Like, I'm 17. Like, I'm scared for myself and just what I am going to go through. Like, no one knows what you're going to go through. And so I think it's crazy that this happened. And I mean, I'm hoping that a lot more voices are coming out about things, and just like more people are just like, wait a second, this is so messed up, and having more people share their opinions, and like men also sharing their opinions about how this is wrong. I feel like there's not enough of that. And I'm hoping, I mean, I've seen some interviews of men saying like their story about how their wives are going through something and whatever. I want like more people just to come out in general about how this is so wrong and what it's actually doing to women. So that's how I feel about that.
This is Angel speaking. I'm going to backtrack a little because I realized I didn't answer the second part of the last question, which is related to this. But yeah, I mean, I think the major thing for me that was able to allow me to be an activist was being part of Collage and being part of this community, because like my mom is a lesbian, and I don't consider her an activist. I consider her very brave for coming out in a very conservative space and coming out to her family, who ended up like disowning her for a few years. Like, that's really brave. And she doesn't consider herself an activist either. She cares about politics in the world, but you know, that's the extent. But I got to be part of this community with all of these youth who a lot of their parents were activists because they were queer or trans. And I think like it was being part of this culture from such a young age, and this community from such a young age, that allowed me to find my own power in advocating for things that were important to me. Collage was the first space that I learned about like classism and racial justice and capitalism. And like I said before, I grew up in a really rural and conservative area. So our school curriculum was very traditional and conservative as well. And I didn't learn about any of this stuff. And it was an extremely white area too. And so like, as a white person, I didn't have any reason to think about, as a white middle class person, I didn't have any reason to think about race or classism before I was in a collage setting. And I got to learn about these things in high school, probably through collage programming. And that really like set me up on a path that empowered me to speak out about things that were messed up in the world. And in college, I was engaged in a lot of activism around mass incarceration, around fossil fuels. And I think that it was that tradition and that community that I was a part of that made me who I am today. And although my activism looks different now, it's more, probably more through art. I write songs and more through, individual conversations and organizing for actually this community, our collager community. It's still core to my life. And I really consider collage and my queerspawn community as like my political home. This is where I can come back to and process things with people, even if it has nothing to do with LGBTQ rights or LGBTQ families. And I think that's how this identity and experience has related to things such as climate change and policing. And it's relevant because we are a diverse community. And again, the thing that ties us together is that we have LGBTQ parents, but other than that, we come from different backgrounds and ethnicities and races and religions and classes. And it's a really strong coalition of people. And I think like that is a huge part of what allowed me to process and be active in the 2020 uprisings was collage and processing all of those events with other white folks in collager spaces, and then being able to build programs for our entire community. And now at this moment, I think like, I think the Roe v. Wade decision, and I won't repeat what Michaela said, but I agree with a lot of what she said on how this is kind of a moment for really thinking about same-sex marriage. And also like sodomy is something that could become criminalized again. And that's pretty terrifying to think about as well. Just because it gives the court system and the criminal justice system more reason to lock more people up. Like that's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. And now it's on the basis of sexuality. So it does feel like we're regressing in a lot of ways, but I also think that it's so easy to get hopeless, right? Like it's so easy because there is just blow after blow after blow. But collage and the trajectory that this community has set me on, I think has taught me really invaluable lessons on what it looks like to care for your community, and that building relationships with people is really the most important core part of any organizing and activism, that you trust people, that you love people, that you have strong relationships. I mean, that's why people will keep showing up to do this work, is because they're getting something out of it too, because we want to hang out with each other. We like each other. We find support in these relationships. And I think that is, just an important lesson that I learned. And I think collage has also, or just this queerspawn community has also like allowed me to think about having our movements move along the pace of disability justice as well. And that like we can't actually move faster than the person who needs the most time and the most space. And it takes this element of urgency away. Although it feels like an emergency and everything that's happening is terrible. And especially when I think about climate change, it's like, how did the Supreme Court just take EPA powers away and make it so governments can do more damage to the environment and release more carbon into the atmosphere. Like, that's terrible to think about. And it's like, wow, we really don't have any time to go backwards with this issue. But the sense of urgency, I think, is not always accurate and not always reality, because we do have each other. And if we can move at the pace of everyone, right, and not leave anyone behind, and really think about what it looks like to care for people and care for people in our relationships, both personal and political relationships, then the work we're doing is actually higher quality, and it's not as performative, and it's not as temporary, and we won't burn out as much. So I'm trying to really keep that in my head when we're organizing, doing this work, and creating spaces for each other to process these events and come up with strategies about what it looks like to move forward.
So I did promise that we would do audience questions. We have about a half hour left. And so I really want to dig into that. But before we do, I want to just speak a little bit about what Collage is doing organizationally to respond to some of these issues. None of the folks on this call representing Collage have parentage concerns just because of how our families were formed. But something that has really become a public question in many ways is the rights of LGBTQ parents. And most people, I think, are unfamiliar with the fact that Obergefell, the marriage equality ruling at the Supreme Court, did not change state law when it comes to how families are recognized. It forced states to recognize same-sex marriages, but it did not automatically mean that same-sex couples who are married are entitled to the same rights and privileges as straight couples. And for many states, that has been a slow process of updating those rules and updating those laws to be beneficial. So for instance, if you are in Michigan and your same-sex lesbian parents use assisted reproduction to become pregnant and then have you, that state does not automatically bequeath parentage to the parent who did not carry you. And so because of that, you then have to either go through a lengthy legal process to do a second parent adoption, which is not something that is easy to do in states that are not set up to handle LGBTQ family formation or LGBTQ adoption. Or you can literally pursue the court for a different kind of parentage protection, which is an order of parentage. There's a lot of family law involved in this. And I did just want to take the time to plug that Collage is working on two big things right now. First and foremost, we are in the process of launching, I will choose to say, a nationwide campaign to reform parentage laws on the state level. It is something that we've been working on since before the Dobbs ruling, but the Dobbs ruling has really accelerated our plans just because the timer is now on us in terms of getting this done. So there's a fabulous link in the chat, by the way, and I'm going to put a different link in there soon. But you should all check that out. It's a really important to understand the degree to which LGBTQ family formation is not easy. And in many ways, collagers, I think, feel a personal responsibility to fight on behalf of our families, not just because it's our family, but also a lot of us are acutely aware of how hard our parents had to fight in order to make our lives livable and as easy as possible. So a nationwide parentage campaign hopefully will be formally announced in the next 2 or 3 months. And so please be on the lookout for that. And then the second thing that I wanted to plug is actually what I'm going to put into the chat. Collage recently joined with our friends at GLAD with 1A, which is an LGBTQ legal rights organization, the National Center for Lesbian Rights and Family Equality, to create a resource for LGBTQ families in the post-Dobbs legal landscape, just anticipating what might be coming in terms of future Supreme Court rulings and what LGBTQ families can do right now to make sure that there is legal security with regard to parentage, with regard to the marriage, if there is a marriage, etc. There is going to be additional questions added. It's an evolving document, specifically for folks like Becca, who have trans parents. The law is still not super helpful for trans parented families, but things are a little easier in some respects, just because the law is not sophisticated enough to understand how to react to a transition. And so in many ways, trans families might skirt around some of these issues just because of our legal system's devotion to biologic essentialism. But regardless, that's a resource that you can share around with friends, with family. If you know anyone who is in an LGBTQ family and is worried, this is a really concrete step that they can take to make sure that their family will be protected regardless of what happens in the future. And the last thing I'll say before I open it up to the audience for questions is really underlining that Collage believes in a transformation in how we think about family. We are no strangers to chosen family, and many of our parents and many of us have gone down that road in particular. And so I really think that it's important as we move forward to be elevating these stories, not only because our families are under attack right now, but really specifically because, as Angel was alluding to, this is more about rethinking how we are in community with one another in general, and rethinking what family can look like and what it should look like, and breaking down the barriers that cis heteropatriarchy has placed on us in terms of what a nuclear family is and how we fit into that or don't fit into that. And so collective parenting, really thinking of the community as a village in terms of it takes a village to raise a child. Those are the types of movements that we would like to see us head toward. And it really leads us to be in stark opposition to some of the more recent decisions when it comes to how people should be treating their bodies and how they should be treating their families. Okay. That was the spiel. I would love to open it up to audience questions. You can DM them directly to me. If you have access in the chat, if you would prefer to raise your hand and ask the question audibly, we're more than happy to take questions in that way as well. So feel free to pop them into the chat or to raise your hand and we'll unmute you. Okay, maybe the hand raising function is not working, but Julia has a question. And so I am going to unmute Julia.
Awesome, thanks so much, Jordan. And I just want to say thank you to the panelists. Like, as a future queer parent, the insights that y'all have given here and the stories that you've shared are just mind-blowing, and you have so much knowledge and wisdom to share with us. So I really appreciate the time you've taken and just the intention you've taken in digging up this stuff and like analyzing it for us and presenting it. My question for y'all is just something I'm kind of curious about as a queer caregiver and someone who works with children a lot and young people a lot. I'm just curious if you have any thoughts about the way that being raised by queer parents kind of might have shifted how you learned about gender and sexuality, or how you thought about those things. You guys touched on it a little bit, but I'm just curious because y'all are a generation that's coming up with so much more insight about gender than we did. and you have such an inside look at that, at what that feels like for a child. So I'm just curious if you have any thoughts to share with us about that.
Yeah, thank you for your question, Julia. This is Angel speaking. Yeah, I mean, I think like it's really tricky. There's a lot of layers here. We have this term in our community called second gen, which means that we also identify as LGBTQ plus in some way, and so do our parents. So I identify as second gen, as queer and non-binary, and I think that the reason my experience is that actually growing up in a community where it wasn't safe to be LGBTQ, and where people assumed that my mom's sexuality was contagious, I actually convinced myself that I was straight and cis for a lot longer than I might have. I don't know. There were so many times in high school even that I was like, yeah, even my extended family would say like, oh yeah, like, I'm not going to let you see, like my aunt would say, I'm not going to let, your mom see my daughter because she's going to make her gay. And so it's like, I wanted to prove to people like, no, it's not contagious. It's not contagious. See, I'm straight. Like it doesn't work that way. And I think I did that for so long that I was not giving myself to explore my own sexuality and gender. And once I got out of that community and went to college and, got to be in a more progressive space, then I started to like see like, wow, I have like a lot of internalized homophobia, and I know that's not my fault, but I realized that that was holding me back in a lot of ways. So I did have my collage community there ready for me when I did come out and was in questioning these things about myself. And that was really beautiful. And I think, because we have LGBTQ parents, we learn about sexuality and gender from a young age. Our programs for 8-year-olds are Gender 101 programs, and talking about how gender is a construct and this binary isn't really real. And I think that was able to be a space that supported me in this questioning, but also people understood this whole dynamic, and I have friends that experience the same thing, queer friends who have queer parents who experience the same thing of being like, yeah, I don't know, or maybe they're still questioning and they're like, I feel this tension inside of me because I've been taught my entire life to prove to people that it's not contagious. So that's a really interesting dynamic, but I also think that there is a lot of beauty in our community, and then of course like there's I think the assumption that people think like, oh well, and when you came out to your mom it must have been easy, right? Like at least your parents didn't disown you, and that's true, my parents did not disown me. But there's also like more nuance than that, like my mom is a 61-year-old lesbian who grew up in a different time than I grew up in, and so like coming out to her as queer was maybe a little bit easier than coming out to her as non-binary, and she's accepting, but she struggles with pronouns, and I do think that is just a symptom of her age and her generation, and it's not really an excuse, but it gives it context. So there are like also these assumptions that I think people make that don't have LGBTQ parents about how our parents would automatically be like perfect and accepting and get everything right. And that's also not true. Yeah, those are my thoughts and experiences around this.
Speaking, I thought I would add on to that. I mean, like, I feel like growing up with two moms has brought a lot of, my parents would educate me from a young age about those types of things. And kind of like what like Angel said, like there's the assumption that, LGBTQ parents like are so like up to speed with things and like know everything. And I mean that was a struggle for my parents when my sister came out as trans. They were like, they obviously knew what trans people were, and like the whole like the whole thing with trans like transgender and everything like that. But like having it be their kid, they're kind of like not expecting it. So like there's that too. But gender in our household is like fluid. My parents make it very clear that like this is our identity. And the thing with it being like contagious and stuff, there's definitely like I've had some of that too, and it's like kind of icky feeling. But like it's clear like you are your own person, you know, like your parents can shape you as much as they can or as much as they want to, but at the end of the day you're your own person. And so like I do consider myself second gen because I'm bisexual, and for the longest time like people like, oh, like that's because of your parents, right, and stuff. But it's like, no, I'm my own human being. Like, you know, I have my own soul, I have this and that, like I am my own person. And so I think it's very important to just have that be a reminder. And as like, you know, for parents too, LGBTQ parents who are thinking about having kids, just know that like you can shape them and educate them, but just know that they also have their own path as well, and they're going to take things differently than you do and have different viewpoints. But yeah, that's how my take on it.
Hi, this is Becca speaking. I think the idea of gender and transitioning was never really like explained to me very well. It just kind of happened. So I kind of learned on my own what gender was and all that. But one experience that kind of sticks out to me in regards to gender is my Nana's very conservative, which is my dad's mother. Conservative in the sense of she doesn't understand it. So she would ask me questions and be like, does your father wear dresses around the house? Like, does your father like wear makeup around the house? Like, would ask me all these kinds of questions. I'm like, no, like she just kind of, you know, when we get home from work or whatever, we take our makeup off, we let our hair down or whatever. And it kind of gave me the idea of like, that's what people think being a woman is wearing dresses and skirts and makeup and having your hair done. And it's just not like that. And my dad's not like that. And so I think, you know, when she was first transitioning, that's what I imagined the future to be like. I imagined the future of, you know, my dad would always be dressed up and always, you know, be like girly, when I kind of realized that like girly isn't girly, if that makes any sense. It's like girly isn't a thing. It's just, you just are your own person. So I think that was hard for me to kind of wrap my head around, especially like, you know, like Angel living in a kind of conservative town, is you were conditioned to be like a girl. You were conditioned to be girly. But then, you know, when my dad's transitioning, I'm realizing like my dad just wears normal clothes. Like, yeah, they might be like a light blue t-shirt or a tank top or whatever, like something a girl would wear, but it's normal. So I feel like that was really hard for me to wrap my head around, was like my dad wasn't necessarily like a girly girl, which is kind of what I expected when I was told she was going to transition. Thank you.
I'm going to put another resource in the chat. We have partnered with the director of this short film, Sally Rubin, to do, I think, 2 or 3 events now, but it's a beautiful short film in the voice of children. Many of the children are collagers, but not all of the children are collagers. And the whole gist of it is just the director, Sally, who is non-binary and a parent, asking these children what they think about various topics related to gender. And it's a beautiful, beautiful film. All of the talking, other than the question asking, is done by very little children. And even in our responses here, I notice there's a difference in terms of age. I think the younger you are, the more familiar you are with the idea of varying gender identities. And in many ways, I think that's part of why there's been a pushback nationally, much in the same way that once we, well, I'm forgetting what the issue was, but I think it was asthma. No, it was left-handedness. When they figured out how to measure how many people were left-handed, all of a sudden there were way more left-handed people, but then the line kind of flattened out because it's not that there were more left-handed people all of a sudden, it's just that we figured out how to account for left-handed people. And in many ways, now that we are openly talking about gender identity, there are more non-binary and trans people identifying at younger ages. I don't think that it has anything to do with an increase in the number of those individuals. It's an increase in the access to the information at a younger age. And in many ways, it's saving lives. And I think that that is why we see the pushback. And I'm hopeful that more and more people will understand that to be what it is that we're looking at. But anyway, I'm sure you can Google the left-handed thing. That's totally real. Any other questions for us?
May I ask a question? This is Mercedes.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, I guess I'm curious how queer folks who, I'm still trying to decide if I'm going to parent or not, but how can queer folks who decide not to parent support you all and the work you're doing? And I'm especially interested to hear about the organizing around traditional family structures, because I find even in the queer community, there's so many folks who are still really invested in the nuclear family structure, which I am really not, and am like really eager to do more organizing around.
That's a great question, Mercedes. Thank you for asking that question. This is Angel speaking. Yeah, I mean, I think like knowing about this identity and experience is really important, and like bringing this identity and experience into more conversations in your queer community. I think that's a place where there's so much potential for allyship and solidarity and support is within the queer community, but people don't know about our experiences and our identities. And so I think like talking to your friends about this talk or our organization or just things that you've learned today is a really great way to start doing that. There are definitely ways to support us more organizationally, but I'll let Jordan talk about that. But I think from, my experience, that is really wonderful when I hear other queer people who aren't parents or who aren't queer spawn, be able to recognize our experience and not let it go erased.
Hi, this is Michaela speaking. I totally agree with Angel about just the way to go. I feel like the one thing is it doesn't have to be like a big like organizing type of thing. It doesn't have to be like this huge big thing. It could be something as small like what Angel said, like conversations and bringing like collages and stuff like that in conversation, and also just like speaking about like certain events that you go to, and then kind of build up to bigger things, just because it won't seem as like overwhelming, because there's a lot of like education that comes behind the scenes. But yeah, I totally agree with Angel.
I'm gonna try not. Sorry, this is Beck speaking. Sorry, Jordan. I just want to say, like, recognizing, I think, when people tell their stories, especially about being in a LGBT family, just recognizing the beauty in it, I think really helps us. Because a lot of times when I tell people my story, I get a lot of sympathy. I get a lot like, wow, that must have been really hard. And it's like they don't recognize like the beauty of it now, like just how healthy it is, and how how all of us, like what our situations could have been like if our parents didn't recognize who they really were. And I think just, I don't know, recognizing that, and even in a conversation, and just talking about it, I think. Thank you.
Hi, this is Jordan. Um, I feel very equipped to answer this question because Becca and Angel and Michaela know this, but I didn't share too much about myself in the beginning. I found out very late in life, like less than 5 years ago, about my biological father. I grew up in a single mom household, and ironically enough, I feel like I have a lot in common with our assisted repro collagers because my mom referred to my biological father, Butch, as my sperm donor my whole life. And so I had a lot of parallels in the sense that we had no relationship. Even when I found out and we had very brief interactions about it, it seemed very clear to me that it was not a part of his life that he had any interest in sharing with me or talking about really at all. So a lot of my conversations have been with my siblings around what they knew, just because I was physically not in the same location as he was, whereas some of my siblings were, and have just a different relationship. So I came into working with collage as a prospective queer parent, as opposed to as queerspawn. And my motivation really was talking to other queer folks who may or may not want to have kids, just about this huge gap in my own knowledge. I remember one of the first conversations that I had when I became involved with collage at the board level with collagers about the rejection that a lot of them felt when they went to LGBTQ centers in college. And they felt like their school had the support of GSAs and things like that. But when they went off to college to find queer community, because they didn't necessarily identify as queer themselves, they were not welcome. And it felt like they had queer community taken away from them. And at first, in my head, I was kind of like, yeah, because you're not queer. Like, you know, it's a safe space for queer people. I get it. But over time, I really came to understand, like, if you grew up with two queer parents or even just one queer parent, you were going on, you know, vacations to gay hotspots, you grew up around a lot of gay uncles or aunts, you know, not blood family, but extended family. And to all of a sudden be told that you're not welcome in the community anymore is jarring and very frustrating. So I think in many ways, just making sure that other queer folks understand, like, this is why some of these groups are at Pride or are important to remember in conversations when we talk about things like don't say gay. You know, if all of the focus is on LGBTQ youth, what happens to the first grader with two dads who, you know, is growing up in Florida now and can't talk about them in all of the other ways that they feel marginalized about having two dads, to add insult to injury in that they can't talk about it. And also because they're not necessarily queer themselves, they don't get any support really, other than from Collage and from other LGBTQ family organizations. That's like a rough time. And for those of you who may be child-free and that's not going to be your personal experience, I'm sure you have friends or family who are queer who may have children in the future. And that is what that experience is going to be like for those kids. And I can't imagine that you would want those thoughts or feelings to be in their heads. My goddaughter has a bisexual mom who is closeted, and it like upsets me. I want to make sure that she knows that I am there for her and that I understand that experience and that I'm willing to step out and advocate on her behalf, even though to all eyes, it looks like she's in a straight family. So anyway, to answer the specific question really quickly about non-nuclear family formation and the work around that, we are really excited about a partnership that we're going to be building with Forward Together, which is a reproductive justice organization that is it's so inclusive of LGBTQ folks that I thought that it was for LGBTQ folks specifically, but they're just really good at making sure that their definition of reproductive justice rightfully includes the queer community as much as it includes anyone else. And so we're going to be joining them in a lot of their culture work around normalizing what is actually pretty common in Black and Brown queer communities, which is this idea of collective child rearing. Another partnership that we are going to be exploring is with a Black queer parenting group called Parenthood. And Forward Together. Could you type in the chat forward the links to Forward Together and to Parenthood, Angel? I cannot talk and type at the same time anymore because I'm an elder millennial. So we are building out these friendships, these organizational bonds, so that we can do a lot more of that cultural competency work outside of our community. It's a huge part of what we do within Collage, and really demonstrating to folks like what our definition of community is and thinking beyond the binaries. But we would love to be doing a lot more of that work in public. And so you'll see more from us on that soon. And then just generically, in terms of supporting, we're a really small organization. We punch at a much higher weight class than we really have any business doing. We are 2 full-time staff members, as well as a temporary staff member. And that is what runs this organization, in addition to a lot of volunteer support. It's really our community that is driving this. And so if you know super wealthy folks who want to help us bring this message nationally, put them in touch. You can go to www.collage.org to get in touch with us in that way. Also, if you have connections at foundations, anything that you feel would enhance our ability to get this message out, that is really what we're most interested in doing right now, is just making sure that of the 6 million estimated collagers that are out there in the United States, that as many of them as possible are connected to our organization and at least are aware of us. As Angel said earlier, there's a lot of folks that, know who we are, but it's just not a focal point of their identity. And we totally respect that and understand that. But for those, especially who are growing up without other queerspawn or collagers around them, collage can very often be a lifeline for those folks. And so just getting the word out so that more people are aware of the work that we do and the community that we're building, that is one of the best ways that you can support us. And with that, I think we are at time. Julia, I will reach out to you about that. Thank you so much for the plug. I have not done that, and that would be a great idea. If you are interested in following up with any of us, please feel free to email us at the info@collage.org. I'm putting in the chat right now, and I can make sure that the message gets to Michaela or Angel or Becca. In the future, if you know of any queer families and you want to send them our way, we would really appreciate it. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you all for coming.
Thank you all so much.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
See you soon, Julia.